Hello, everybody. Welcome, and I'm glad that you're tuning in, and thank you for that. So I'm really pleased to introduce you to Hue Woodson in this dialogue. I had read a book, one of his most recent books. I think it's called, I forgot what it's called. I think it's a Theologian's Approach to Heidegger, and loved it, and thought that he had a unique voice and perspective on Heidegger and theology that brought the two and revealed and spoke a lot to what we've been talking about on this channel and all the dialogues that I've been having, speaking directly to nihilism, to the meaning crisis, and possible ways to one, find, kind of disclose more where we are at in this particular time and how to most intelligently and humanly respond to this time with everything that's happening. And no doubt the shift that's going on with theology and particularly religion, and what that shift means, where it's headed, and what kind of pertinence it has for our understanding of our own lives, on every level, really is, I think, what we're all what all the conversations seem to be circumambulating around, as it's revealing itself to me anyways. And so it was really great to reach out to him and have him so enthusiastically and warmly agree to have a conversation with me. And I think we both found it really enlivening. In fact, after our conversation, he had texted me and he said, you got me working on my own channel, and I'm working on ideas to make videos. So that was really delightful. And I'm just glad to have him part of this conversation. Definitely a creative, thoughtful, unique voice in this. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'll just read what he wrote, introducing himself on his website, and I'll include the link to that. Hue Woodson is an assistant professor of English at Tarrant County College in Fort Worth, Texas. He has a he's a PhD candidate in English at the University of Texas at Arlington. And he is currently writing his dissertation on Heidegger, posthumanism, and rhetoric. He holds a theological master's in history and theology, and a master's in theological studies from Bright Divinity School at Texas Christian University, an MA in English from the University of North Texas, a master's in education in curriculum and instruction from the University of Texas at Arlington. He is the author of Heideggerian Theologies and a Theologian's Guide to Heidegger. His research specializes in contemporary critical and literary theory, Shakespeare, rhetoric, Heidegger, continental philosophy, theological and philosophical hermeneutics, systematic theology, and existential theology. His works include articles on bell hooks, Slav Zizek, Richard Wright, and Lacan. He has written 14 entries for four-volume Race and Ethnicity in America, pre-contact to the present. He is also author of more than 30 books, including novels, poetry collections and short story collections. He lives in Dallas-Fort Worth area with his wife, Samantha. So, as you can see, I could barely articulate everything, all the studying that he's done and all the degrees that he has and all of the work that he's done. He's obviously impressively prolific. And what's really interesting to me is you can feel, at least I could feel in getting to know him, the spirit out of which all that arises from, right? I think usually when at least for me, when I think of theology or theologians, I get this kind of picture of these kind of old dudes, in libraries or something, who are, don't talk much. And I don't know, there's some kind of stodgy, heavy, medieval pictures come into my mind. Hue, though, is like, he's got a spark and aliveness to him and a curiosity and a playfulness that really, I would imagine, speaks to what he refers to himself as primarily an artist. In fact, he characterizes a lot of the people that he studies as artists. And a big part is what we'll reveal, especially in this first half of the conversation. I'm breaking it up in two parts. The first half is mostly about him and where he's coming from in his writing and who he's interested in and why. And so he sees himself and kind of found himself just following his interest, carving out a pretty unique perspective on Heideggerian theology. I would say that he's written in a way that is kind of like, you could say, from a theologian's perspective, what can they get out of Heidegger? And I would say also that, implicitly and probably explicitly, what if we look at theology from a Heideggerian perspective, how do those two things, when they talk to each other, what's possible? And I think that, as you could imagine, how that possibility, those two things talking to each other, would deeply reveal and shed light on our current time. So my understanding is that on one level, we are talking about philosophy and we're talking about theology, yet what those categories articulate is something that's actually not abstract, but fundamental in our concrete experience. In other words, how is it that everything on every level in our concrete life, by virtue of what does it present itself as intelligible at all, right? When you start to ask that question, then you start to get into fundamental understandings of the innermost sense of something and the uppermost sense of something, the theos, the God's eye view, the ontos, the innermost. If you bring those two things together, those intimately sit under and above as horizons of what makes anything intelligible as it is at all, right? How we can even perceive the difference between where a town ends and a forest begins, that it discloses itself as in that way at all, that we can discern those things, right? And build towns based on that discernment is the movement of intelligibility, which are given by these deep pre-thematic understanding of being. So as you're listening to this, what I want to encourage you to do is to tune into these authors and the people that we're talking about in Heidegger are really addressing that level of things, not just abstract ideas, right? But that which animates our perceptions. our precognitions, right? Our, as Vervaeke would say, our relevance realization. All right. Enjoy. This first half is mostly us getting to know him and what he's up to, and what it's like being him. And then, unfortunately, he had some technical difficulties, so it cuts off, and that's where I cut off. That's where I end the first section, and then the second part will be in video in this next video, and I'll make another video, kind of giving some pretext for that. And unfortunately, when he came back on, I forgot to hit the record button for like 10 minutes. So I'll try to backtrack and fill those 10 minutes before the next video, where it really starts to go into dialogos, as I like to say, where we start to not just going into dialectics and understanding and orienting, but where actually the conversation becomes almost like an entity in itself, and we begin to be breathed by it. And so I'll release that in a couple days or so. All right. Thanks for tuning in. I look forward to hearing your comments, and much love.
Good.
All right. Welcome. So this is the first time we've met. So I have how I came across you is I got your I bought your book. Is it Heidegger's Theologians? I think it's your most recent book.
The most recent one is Theologian's Guide to Heidegger.
Yes. Yeah, there's two of them. Maybe that's the one I'm reading currently. Okay. I read the first one.
Oh, okay, that was Heideggerian Theologies.
Yeah, and I was it resonated on a bunch of different levels. Like, one is, I don't think that I personally, and I've scoured everything on Heidegger as far as I can tell, and I've never seen somebody really zero in on this perspective of theology in Heidegger. There was one book, it's like, well, what, as a theologian, if I read Heidegger,
right.
I'm like, that's a very different way of looking.
Definitely. Yeah.
And how it speaks to me and how it links to kind of like what I'm doing, and like a lot of the conversations and dialogues I've been having is, it seems to be what's emerging is really dealing with, I think, what Heidegger would call nihilism.
Mm-hmm.
All of its forms, and all of its numbness, and all of its concealment, right? And I live in the Bay Area, which is where technology. I'm right at the point where I'm looking at the future for the whole world.
True.
It's happening quicker and quicker and quicker.
Yes, right.
And there's a lot of people I've been talking to that are trying to make sense of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Feel a sense of urgency about it, but it's not obvious how to respond. And a big conversation in that has been, well, what is it? Is it possible for people to find meaning, right, through Christianity, right? That's one of the conversations, and it's been a really productive dialogue. I would say the conversation that we had hasn't been about like, it's not been about gotten bogged down into the like, is there a God, and like, do you believe in God, and any of those kind of new atheist debates. It's more like, is it even possible to have a religion in that sense, right? Even if you are religious and you go to church, is it possible to not be in the age of nihilism? And so, even if you do that all the time, like, I think you could still say it's like, yeah, there's something going on, that our time seems to be this kind of loss of being, as Heidegger would talk about. And so a lot of conversations have been circling around that. So when I read your books, I'm like, whoa, this is you have a perspective on this and an angle and a place that you're looking from that has me wonder, what is it that's called, what's speaking to you such that
Okay.
you're drawn to write about this? Like, are you, I have all kinds of curiosities. Is like, are you a theologian? Are you are you a Christian? Are you like, how did, what
Okay.
are you listening to such that would have you,
Oh, to be able to get that sort of
and you live in Texas, right? So I can't let that one slide, right? Like,
yeah, true. Yeah, that's true. That's I must admit. That's true. yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, I guess I've been kind of uniquely kind of calibrated in those lines. So, oh, here we go. So I think I'm uniquely calibrated in those lines because I think I studied theology, so I went to seminary. I had 2 degrees in theology, and then I studied English and literature, Shakespeare at UNT. And then I was a high school teacher for some time before I became a professor here at TCC, Tarrant County College in Fort Worth. So a lot of my mentors I had initially when I studied theology were church historians. That's one of my mentors who I just talked to before came down the phone with you. And another one was a person who specialized in Kierkegaard. Like that was his main figure. And so both of them knew Heidegger really well, typically. And so I came to Heidegger by way of Sartre, kind of learning who is this Sartre person, what is he doing with his novels, that sort of thing.
right.
And so, but I've always kind of kept myself kind of between these 2 roads of Heidegger and philosophy, and then where that road goes, but also Heidegger's contribution to theology and theologians in particular, and how they take their road. So I've been kind of a philosopher-theologian or theologian-philosopher sort of thing, kind of bridging both of these roads at the same time.
Right.
For a while.
And you currently, you're married. Do you have kids?
No, married, no kids yet.
Okay. Yeah.
So they give me more time to write and do other things, as you can imagine.
Yeah. Also, just one of the things when I actually clicked on your author page and I knew that you wrote poetry, and then I looked, like, you don't just write poetry. You have like 20 books. I'm like, which one should I pick? Because I wanted to read it before I talked to you, but I couldn't download because it was still in the mail.
We've got time. We'll have an ongoing sort of dialogue about all these things. But I started writing novels. My first novel I was like in the 6th grade when I wrote my first novel.
Huh. And, you were in the 6th grade when you wrote.
Grade, yeah, 6th grade. It was like 150 pages front and back, cursive. And I look on it now. I have no idea what that book was about. But I was working on it nonstop. It seems like it's some kind of time traveler doing something. I don't know what the end goal was, but I just kept working and working. Then I put it aside for a while, and then I started writing again in I think 1997, I think, something like that, 98. Right. And then I started writing novels, and then writing poetry, short stories, all those things. And I will always be a novelist. That's kind of part of who I am, creative wise, And,
yeah.
I used to paint. I was a painter at one point when I was younger person. I used to study the Renaissance painters and Impressionists, Cubism and stuff. So I have that artistic streak in me, I think. And I think that I've always kind of thought that that's probably how I see Heidegger as a sort of an artist in a lot of ways. I mean, he's presenting things in an artistic approach. Even this idea of being is a very aesthetic thing, I think. And so theologians typically are artists, I think, as well.
Yeah.
And they calibrate things in certain ways based on how they see the systematic theology working together, which is kind of because the first book are the 4 theologians that are influenced by Heidegger, particularly. And each of them use Heidegger in different ways. And so I take these 4 paths as paths that begin with Heidegger, but then they become themselves what I call Heideggerian theology, which of course is a blasphemous thing to say. It's just blasphemous with that. But I said, what, I'm gonna go with that. That's what I feel, is what they're doing.
Yeah.
I thought that became kind of, I think, a good inroads to this ongoing conversation about what does Heidegger have to say to theology.
Right.
and what place does Heidegger have in theology, which I think is
Huh.
starting to kind of come to the fold more and more now, I think. But as you mentioned, I mean, there's not a whole lot
No.
about that. I mean, I know there's Judith Wolff, who I know has had a couple of books on that.
Right.
And
But there's a lot of the French theologians, right?
yes,
The phenomenologists, but they seem to be a lot about defining themselves, like how they're not.
yes,
They are, but they're pushing against Heidegger at the same time.
exactly. That's exactly true. I think there's a tension there. I think, and I think a lot of it is, I think a lot of it's like an ignorance or maybe even a forgetfulness about what Heidegger's early career was like. I mean, he was he was studying to be a priest at one point early in his career. That was kind of the beginning, and then he moved away from that. But the Protestant roots are always there. I mean, Judith Wolff has talked about that. Protestant roots are still there, and his first teaching position was at a school where he worked hand in hand with a lot of theologians. I mean, he worked with Bultmann when Bultmann was getting started. He worked with Tillich when he was just getting started. So they shared ideas. He and Bultmann did a lot of work together. That I mentioned in the book. I mean, they had seminars they would conduct together. They were going to write a book together at one point. So they always are walking hand in hand. I think they realized that theology and philosophy can inform each other without being in such a big tension. That's something that, I mean, you go back to Aquinas or Augustine, they recognize that even back then. Philosophy contributed to what we're doing. I mean, Plato to Augustine and Aquinas to Aristotle, and it's always there. But over time, it's become kind of it's been because of his Nazi Nazi affiliation, in the 30s. It's become really tricky to figure out what can he say to theology, having been involved in National Socialism.
Yeah, totally. The more I read about that, the more I get the sense that actually, strange to say, but I just get the sense that he was more irritated with the Nazis because it wasn't the Nazi party that he thought was going to happen, right?
That's exactly true. Yeah, exactly.
He was actually, in a certain sense, and actually we just read something about that, somebody who wrote a book about Plato and Heidegger, and where he was weaving it together. He's like, I think that Heidegger actually misread Plato.
That's very true. I think that's true. Yeah, as with other thinkers, I think like I mentioned, he's an artist, and so he's not concerned with staying true to the Greek as he's translating the Greek. So he plays with that a little bit. I mean, he can take. I mean, Derrida's, of course,
he's an example of that, right?
We take like a sentence and then we say this sentence represents the whole. Heidegger does the same thing. He's concerned with certain aspects of Plato, certain aspects of Aristotle.
Yeah.
And some Nietzsche for certain reasons to advance his own philosophy.
Right.
So often what's been said a lot about what he does with a lot of those thinkers is that he what they call Heideggerizes those thinkers, which is a term that Gadamer uses. He uses them for his own purposes without really being true to what they're doing. So you can easily look at his reading of Plato and say, well, there's good stuff there, but also this translation of this Greek word is not what that should mean. There's a playful approach to what he's doing, I think. Yeah, but that's very true. You're right on it with those things. Yes,
and that playfulness and that link that you actually made to yourself of like what I heard you say is like, I think these are the paths that I've taken, like the middle way between like the theology and the philosophy.
Yes, right.
But then you said this thing, but really, like, I'll always be a writer. I'll always be
always be a right artist. Yeah.
And then there's a way where you kind of like you said that about Heidegger and other theologians. So when you like, I guess I'll just kind of ask you the Heideggerian kind of question, which is, when you say artist, I'm not asking you necessarily what an artist is, but what do you mean, right? When you say artist, what is the difference that makes Heidegger an artist and you an artist, whatever it is? Because I just get this sense with you of like reading your work and talking to you now of like there's something calling to you that has you do this, right? You're listening to something.
Yeah, I think that there's an aesthetic approach that these thinkers are doing. It's an aesthetic thing. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you could, I mean, if you look at, well, take Rahner or Tillich or different ones that had Heidegger at some point,
Yeah.
they had Heidegger in a certain window of time. And
Right.
so, like with Rahner's in the 30s, when he's at Freiburg, while he is negotiating these Nazi affiliations, you've
Right.
got Tillich in an early career. And
And
so those
Reiner's he's a German. I just bought one of his books. You
Rahner or Tillich? Rahner?
Reiner.
Yeah, Rahner. Yeah, Rahner is German roots. He was Catholic.
Yeah.
So he was involved in Vatican
A
II.
little bit. I'm like, ooh, this is dangerous. Like,
That's what
man, this is a whole world. I'm like, I don't know if I should.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. It's brilliant stuff. Now, the funny thing about Rahner is like his dissertation was on Heidegger at one point, and the dissertation actually failed. Like his chairperson failed his dissertation. He thought it was too Heidegger, basically. They kind of pushed it aside. And that book got published later, and it became one of his famous early works, The Spirit in the World, which used Heidegger very explicitly, as well as another Catholic thinker that he's kind of weaving together. But he would not have been what he had been as a theologian had it not been for Heidegger, I think.
Right.
With his contributions to Vatican II and how he was involved in hashing out these issues with the Pope kind of during that period in the 60s and 70s. He became it's probably might that piece too far to say. I think he's probably the most influential and most theological of theologians. Not just Catholic, but I would say in general. I mean, his body of work is just massive. I mean,
Yes.
Wrote all the time. Everything is huge with him. You know, he's considered a systematic thinker, I think. But he's also influenced, I think, by phenomenology, which I think is part of Rahner's work too.
Yeah.
The Husserl side of it, of the 30s, 20s, or whatever. Now I mentioned the other ones like Tillich. Tillich is he kind of falls in line with that existential theology, which I've written about a little bit.
Yeah.
He's concerned with being in a very specialized way, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you read any of him. He's
I know.
brilliant. Yeah.
I know. I read him when I was in my. I think I was like right out of high school. I was reading Tillich, and but the thing that because John considers Tillich one of the prophets of the addressing the meaning crisis, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, true. Yeah.
And he makes this distinction because one of the things where John's kind of coming from, he's saying that I don't know if it's actually possible, right, for us to for it to be viable today, given the age that we're in and given like how deeply embedded in science in ways that fashion us that we don't even have to know about it, right?
Right.
Like, can we have a religion that's theist?
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's not saying like he's not arguing whether or not there is a theistic God. It's more like, is it viable? Will it turn and reveal being in a sensible way? And that's what a big question that he has in his work. And he says that Tillich is one of the few people that he thinks that Tillich is actually not a theist.
Yeah, I think that's a good critique of him. I think. I mean, it's a bit tricky because he is so influenced by philosophy that he is a bit hesitant to think of God in a theistic, metaphysical, way that goes traditional in terms of how it's looked at tradition. Which is Heidegger's same critique too. That when you look at things in a traditional way, metaphysics becomes something that gets in the way of what you want to do, right? So you want to get beyond that. So that's why I think, and often this is a critique of Heidegger's being in time, is that it looks like he's talking about God in there to a certain extent with capital B being, but he's trying to stay away from that term altogether, right? Because it traps you in these sort of metaphysical sort of things that you can't get out of.
Right.
Yeah. That's an excellent critique of him that I think is makes him someone that gets championed, I think, a lot for, I think, more postmodern theologians. But then he gets looked at kind of in a standoffish sort of way by those that like, what Karl Barth is doing, or like, thinkers that are uplifting the being of God in a way where that's the centerpiece of everything they do.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's some camps here, and of course Bultmann was kind of in between, where he's talking about demythologizing things, which is getting to the same thing, taking out these metaphysical assumptions that we have,
Right.
and then get to something more pure, which
Right.
I think Heidegger is trying to get to as well.
Yeah.
But the theistic thing is very tricky, because to do theology, you have to think of the theos.
Mm-hmm.
But to think of the theos requires you to go back to the root word of theos and then be able to think of it in a non-humanistic way.
Right.
So all those pieces are all up in the air, and you're trying to figure out, well, how do I do that if I am a human and I'm dealing with things that way? It becomes tricky.
Right. Theos. What if you can just take me into what is it that makes theos, right?
Yes.
What is that? What is the thing that gathers, and has theology and everything around that like shine forth?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think it depends on how you center theos within a systematic theology structure. So like I mentioned Barth's concerned with the word logos as being everything that makes theos manifest. So he's looking at John in a way that word and God become things that then are rooted together, and word becomes something that bolsters the theos. Then you have other thinkers that might look at it in terms of history, so the trajectory of time with the theos. So when does history of time begin? The theos is something that's there first. Everything spins off of that as it goes on.
Right.
Or you look at other thinkers like Tillich. Tillich is more concerned with the being of beings, like what is it that's the underpinnings of theos that we can relate to at a level of us not being theos. It becomes kind of interpersonal thing. It becomes kind of a I don't want to say intersubjectivity, but it becomes kind of something that you can see in theos that then projects back to you, like an imago Dei, like the idea of the image of God coming back to something.
Right.
But it's a thing that if you think back to like maybe Plato and Aristotle and how they look at theos, they're looking at theos in a way that is somewhat theistic, but also not theistic. So Plato is thinking of things in a broader sense.
Right. So it's like theos in the Greek sense, the pre-Christian sense, is more of like the God's eye view, right?
Kind of like something that creates, but then, this is something that creates, but then itself is not created. It's like the unmoved mover. It's something that moves, but it does not move itself. It's the centerpiece of all the things that are connected to it. So you're looking at it in a very logical way. So that theos, in terms of theology, is concerned with the logic, the logos of it more so than the theos. So it becomes kind of two pieces. That Heidegger then kind of gets to later in his career, trying to figure out, playing more up the logos end of it, the logical side of it. And
gathering that sense of just that's just, it's interesting. Like a lot of, I think this is just the case with theologians and mystical writings is the sense of just the word logos. It's so, that sense of like a hand that gathers it together. Like I know that
definitely.
Heidegger
was aware of that. That's why he starts going to the Greek and looking at the Greek word of logos. The Greek word logos is it's an nominative term, and then but you have different version of logos depending. There's five Greek cases, and logos nominatively is a term that is used to be at the centerpiece. But then you have logos that could be logon, which is of logos. Or you have logu, which is generated of logos. So you different versions of it. So he's looking at it in terms of the purest form that hasn't been corrupted by tradition and corrupted by the humanization of that, to where it can point to truth, which becomes for him, as you know, this idea of unconcealment is a big thing. Unconcealment then becomes a form of theos, or a form of, I think, logic or logos. I think so.
And then the thing with aletheia, that sense. See, for the longest time, this is I started reading, for me, I started broke into philosophy when I was actually in art school in San Francisco. I'm a painter and a sculptor. And actually my hero was Michelangelo.
Oh yeah, my hero too. I love it. Yeah. I read it when I was a kid. I was just so obsessed with him.
Oh yeah, totally. Like that's I don't know if you can see this, but there's here's my house. I'll just show you my last sculpture, but this is you can kind of.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, I see. Okay, yeah.
Can you see? Can you see it? Let's see. Hang on one second. So it's like a tree, right?
Oh,
tree that comes up, and this is actually like an image. This is the Logos, right? This is
for sure. Yeah.
Right. The emergent,
figure. The Logos is coming out. Is coming out of.
This emergent quality.
Emergent, yeah, definitely, yeah.
And it seems one of the things that I know that in conversations with John and Chris and with everybody, but really with John has been talking about that it seems like what's viable is what he's saying is he makes a distinction between like the divine, right? Something that's the divine and theistic, right? And sacred, right? And he makes that distinction. I think he gets actually. I think Tillich gets at that too.
He does, yeah. Yeah, he does, yeah. That's a key distinction. The theistic and sacred then are different modes of being, different ways things exist, right? Yeah. Different versions of unconcealment.
Right.
The theos that unconceals itself, and then the sacred that unconceals itself. Yeah. And then those two versions then allow for theos to be translated either in terms of the person, interpersonal understanding of it, or the sacred in terms of sacramental understanding of theos, like the practice of ecclesiology and the idea of the church being something that allows theos to represent itself, which are two different views. I mean, they're two different. Yeah. Some people never understand theos through ecclesiology or through sacraments. They just never get there. Yeah. Some people need to have the personal experience more so than anything else. Yeah. And others need that sacrament as something to ground and then touch and be able to feel the presence of theos. Right. Which is very different views, but I think views that you have to have in terms of these two sides. Right.
And there's that sense of like with the divine, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Of shining through it, right?
Yeah, right.
And it does have that sense of like higher, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Where sacred can have this sense of where it's more like the onto, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. Ontological
sense of emergence of something like a complexity coming up that isn't like created, but it emerges somehow, and it has that sense of like where you can. It's not necessarily like considering you as a person. You can't necessarily have a conversation with it, but it can. It can give you a felt sense of fullness, meaning, this sense of sacred, right?
Some very tactile, and something you can feel with the senses, or something that Heidegger uses a term that I think might relate to this, the idea of existence, existence, the standing out of something.
Yes.
But then the standing out is just something that just allows you to have a tangible relationship, but you still have something beneath that has not stood out from itself. It's something that is metaphysical, something that's beneath.
Wow. Yeah. So what, I'm still quite struck with like, so were you born in Texas?
Yes.
Yeah. I know that you live close. You live close to my son, which is.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, I was born in Dallas.
Okay.
And I've lived mainly in Arlington.
Yeah.
And I've been here pretty much the whole time. I was away in the military for about 6 years. But other than that, I've been here in Texas in this area, in DFW area.
Right on.
Live and play now. So.
I'm just struck by like it's a rare thing to have like Texas to grow a Heideggerian.
True. I mean, there's a couple of really famous. Well, like I mentioned, the camps of Heideggerians and stuff. But there's one person that's kind of a old elder statesman within Heideggerian studies. He teaches at University of Texas at Dallas. He's written a lot on Heidegger and Nietzsche and Heidegger's Nazi roots. Charles Baumbach is really amazing. And then there's another person that was his student. I think she's at University of Dallas. Her name is Cynthia Nielsen, who's really good. She's also kind of a Heidegger person. Then you have a Heidegger circle, like North Texas, Heidegger circle that meets in this area where all the people come down and they interact and have conferences on Heidegger here. I think it's just north here, like in the Plano area, like right where I live. Is where that happens.
You had mentioned before we started recording something about like, yeah, you wrote your first book, and it wasn't like, I got the sense of like, it wasn't like you were around a lot of Heideggerians or something, right? As if there's a lot of Heideggers to be around, but like,
yeah.
And you talked about like, once you got out there, people were like, who's this guy? And that some of the Heidegger world.
There's always these lineages that go on. It's like these generations. So like when someone comes along, it's like they automatically know, well, who did he study with and who did that person study with? So there's like this linkage. So like I was someone, I did study initially with a Heidegger person at the school where I am now. Not where I teach, but the school where I'm finishing my PhD. And she is kind of an elder statesman. But I was kind of an unknown quantity, I guess, when I came, kind of like this book just kind of came out of nowhere. It's like, who is this person? And what is he? Why is he doing Heideggerian theology? And what does that mean?
Yeah, it's not a common thing for people to just write a Heidegger book. Right?
True, yeah, it's definitely not. And so I got a lot of correspondence with people that were asking me about it. That were in these circles, and then I talked to other people. So these different echelons of people that go up, and so they said, "Who are you? Who do you study with? And what are you doing Heidegger?" And that sort of stuff. And so, and then I kind of realized that there's this sort of real circle involved in terms of like, who did you study with? So you have like people that either knew Heidegger when he was alive, that then live on with these lineages. He died in 76, so you have people that studied with him in the 60s, that sort of things. They're students, and then they're students. So these different generations that come down. So it becomes almost like a sacred handling of Heidegger in a lot of ways in terms of where you've been, who you studied with, that sort of thing. And I think initially there was a little bit of trepidation regarding what I was doing and who I was, that sort of thing. But it's been interesting to kind of be, welcomed into whatever these circles are that I never knew existed, and being a voice to carve out another path, I think, with Heidegger that I think hasn't really been looked at as much as it could have been. I mentioned like Judith Wolf is doing that, and there's a couple other people too, but it hasn't really been prevalent along those paths. The theology and Heidegger are often looked at as being strange bedfellows. They don't really work together, I think.
Right.
But it takes a person to have studied theology, because I studied Luther and Calvin, Reformation, history of Christianity. That's what I specialized in, Paul. And studying Heidegger was something that was kind of naturally went with what I was doing, in terms of all the theology I studied initially.
The thing, and how did you come into theology? Well, what I'm hearing is you came into theology as everything as an artist, right?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Did you come though into theology because out of being a practicing Christian? Okay, got it.
So I think I wanted to learn more about things, because I think you kind of realize over time that there are different ways of being a Christian, obviously, just like it was in the first 100 years of Christianity.
Right.
And I think now it becomes possible for, a person to go to a church and be in a church for 40, 50 years and constantly get a sanitized diet version that's not very robust. And they don't know it. And they're, it's kind of like being in the bottom of the cave, as Socrates said, you don't know you're in the bottom of the cave.
Yeah.
So when I decided to go to seminary at TCU, it was one of these things where they always tell you initially when you go in that one or two things can happen. Either your faith can be broadened and expanded, or your faith gets unraveled. And I saw both of those things happen. And me going in, it just made me be more of a clear-eyed in terms of what's going on. Like, who are the thinkers that are dealing with in these different things, these different periods in time? What are the big questions that are going on? What is Jesus' ministry like? What's the Reformation? What are all these issues then that make Christianity what it is today? And I became really fascinated with that over time.
Right.
That informed me becoming a theologian along those lines. And then, of course, the philosophy just helped me understand theology all the more.
Right. 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 So they mutually, I have to say, it's like my understanding of theology when I read theologians,
Mhm.
I'm like, they're philosophers,
True.
right?
Yeah. True. That's
It's really difficult to draw the clear lines between the two.
That's very true. Yeah, I mean, you look at Anselm and Aquinas, and
Yeah.
the medieval thinkers during that time. All of them were looked at during their time as philosophers, but they're contributing to theological discourse.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, Tillich, of course, is that way. I mentioned Rahner, Bultmann,
Right.
even Macquarrie, who's one of the two that translated Heidegger's Being in Time in '62. He was Anglican in terms of his background, but he was very much a philosopher in terms of how he's looking. I mean, his dissertation is on Heidegger and, and Bultmann when he wrote it in the 50s. So I think you can't get away from that. I mean, I think it's a good theologian has to be somewhat of a philosopher. I think probably Karl Barth was probably rolling over his grave me saying that, but it's very true. You have to look at it from a philo sort of way in terms of what am I doing here piecewise.
Yeah.
And then, but the reverse, of course, is not as true. I mean, philosophers typically are not going to.
It's really true. There's a distinction for sure.
Sartre, for example, would be a prime example. He was not a theologian at all. But I think it has to go to theologian to become a philosopher, because I think that feeds into how one does systematic theology from a philosophical point of view. I think it makes it more rich. It makes it robust. If you can look at these, I mean, I mentioned with like Augustine. Augustine would never have done what he had done had it not been for Plato.
Yeah, right? And Plotinus, right?
Yeah, I mean, it hadn't done that. I mean, who knows where Christianity would be in those 400, 500, CE, or even Luther. Luther had some philosophy in his background, Calvin, of course.
Yeah.
So it very much feeds what they do, and it brings it to another level in terms of asking these deeper questions about theos.
Yeah.
If you're doing it strictly from just a biblical studies perspective, you're always going to be at a disadvantage.
Right.
Because certain things there's gaps, there's certain things that aren't there.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have to fill in with the philosophy. And you become an artist that way. You become someone that then, how do I shape and mold this to speak to a certain concern, a certain issue that makes theology live on and continue to prosper in different ways.
So when you got fascinated with the theology and how that works, I'm not hearing that it was I'm not hearing, at least I'm not getting the sense from you as you're talking about it, where it didn't seem like it
Not
unraveled.
at all. No, not for me. No, not at all.
And it sounds like it just didn't seem like that was the question that you didn't go in there with that question.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
What was the thing, like, what were you hearkening to, or what was hearkening to you, right, about the theologians? It's like, because I think what I'm getting about being an artist so far, just in the way that kind of hermeneutically, the felt sense I have of when you speak it is that there's something that shines forth, that it doesn't come as propositions, right, worked out. It's more like a sense that you just find your interest moving towards it, right, you kind of go follow this horizon that keeps moving, and then you look behind you and you're like, you have a whole body of work and 8 books. You're still like, if anything, you just articulate, like you're more close to the mystery. And I get that sense with you. It's like you're not trying to solve anything, you're trying to get close to something. Is that?
I think that's my continental philosophy sort of sensibilities there. I think you're always trying to figure out how to get one step further toward to something, whatever that something is. I mean, that's what Heidegger's doing. I mean, Heidegger's constantly concerned with, unconcealment later in life. He goes to poetry eventually, he goes to language. So he's getting to these things that feed everybody's experiences in the world in ways that speak to humans in general, going further than what he did in his early career, And so that's kind of what I think I try to do, is I try to figure out how do I make these things relevant now, and then be able to speak to them now. I mean, posthumanism is something that I work a lot in. I mean, I love posthumanism. That's one of the big things with it.
Right.
Figuring out, going beyond the human and going beyond those issues, and lets us know how we understand technology and understand animal studies and plant studies.
Right. Right.
Materiality and those issues like that. And those are all things that are cutting edge that constantly allow philosophy to be dragged along, I guess you could say, in a way that constantly speaks to now. Because think about this, I mean, we think about philosophy, there's certain things that have been discussed and written about that if I write about those things now, it's like, well, someone wrote about that 100 years ago or 200 years ago. What can you add to it new? Only thing I can do is I can say is, well, I'm in 2020. And that's the only thing I can add new. But what nuances are there to it that then speak in ways that, you know, Sartre's not speaking to, or Schopenhauer's not speaking to, or anybody else during the, you know, 18th century or 19th century. And so that becomes something that motivates me, I think, trying to figure out how to keep Heidegger at the table in some of these things. When he influences everybody. I mean, he's considered, you know, obviously one of the most important, if not, well, not one of the few most important philosophers in history. You know? Even with Derrida, I mean, there's people that focus on Derrida that way. You know? Same thing, Foucault that way. You know, these thinkers constantly are cited, constantly are read, constantly are translated. You know, they constantly have new generations that are exposed to them and find new things for them. So, but the problem with Heidegger is that there's often this time we want to prevent him from having a voice at the table because of the Nazis. Because of the fact that he wasn't a good person. You know? But think about that. Most philosophers are not good people. A lot of them are not horrible people.
Most geniuses aren't known for their emotional.
They're horrible guys. You would never want to. You would never want to like have a talk with them or anything. They're horrible people. They're all the bad guy, you know. So it's kind of like you can't base it on them and their personal background. You know, you have to base it on what is it that they're saying that constantly speak to us now. You know, and the Nazism thing, that's a big hurdle to go over. I mean, I know there's camps within Heidegger studies that refuse to look at the Nazism. They just don't want to go there. They leave. You know, I mean, one of my mentors I had early when I studied Heidegger, I won't mention her name, but she just never wanted to accept or read any of that. Once those black notebooks came out, she didn't want to go there. She was just very interested in sanitizing Heidegger in a way that I think was helpful for her, but wasn't helpful for Heidegger. Because he was a complex person that had a lot of, you know, complex issues that feed his thought in different